Hello again, and welcome to the Castle Old Skull Hawk Moor project, where we explore the deepest roots of Dungeons & Dragons in search of greater understanding and forgotten details that we can use to move forward into the future of old-school-inspired game design. The Hawk Moor project celebrates the world of Greyhawk, as created by Gary Gygax, as well as the world of Blackmoor, as created by Dave Arneson, and all of their gaming friends and co-creators. Today, we are beginning the deepest dive of all time into Gary Gygax's second dungeon module, G2, Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl. I can absolutely guarantee that no matter how much of a Greyhawk sage you are, you will learn something new about this iconic adventure saga today. Stay tuned. Hello everyone. I hope you are all doing well in these trying times and continuing to enjoy your old school gaming with friends and family. For today's new feature at Hawk Moor, we're going to explore Gary Gygax's classic 1978 Conan-inspired dungeon module, Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl. As we read in the tales of long ago, for example, in How Thor Paid the Mountain Giant His Wages, as featured in Bulfinch's mythology, The Age of Fable, by Thomas Bulfinch, 1855. Having vanquished the lesser giants who imperiled Asgard, the mighty Thor, with some reluctance, battled then against the frost giants, who some say are half-brother Loki's kin. Once on a time, when the gods were constructing their abodes and had already finished Midgard and Valhalla, a certain artificer came and offered to build them a residence so well fortified that they should be perfectly safe from the incursions of the frost giants and the giants of the mountains. The second module in the G series, if we regard it as a sequel to G1, Studying of the Hill Giant Chief, and not as a standalone scenario, begins with the presumption of near total victory by the adventurers. The bloodthirsty plunderers, or heroes if you will, have wiped out the hill giants and are now going after the next strongest and nearest group of enemies hidden up high in the mountains. These are the frost giants, the sons of Ymir, and bane of the bloodline of Odin. Frost giants are more iconic and easier to learn about due to their deep Norse heritage, as you will see. Gary Gygax's frost giants are straight from Norse mythology, the Hrimthursar, or rime giants, and they are the go-to foes for Thor and his brethren, as featured throughout the various Elder Tales. In Dungeons & Dragons, frost giants are chaotic evil and ruthless foes. Gary depicts the D&D frost giants in G2 as man-eaters as well. For example, in the secret kitchen far beneath the ice, we read, "Amidst heaped foodstuffs to the north are 4 human captives in a cage, being saved for a feast." Here we are reminded of the classic words, "Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." Despite such macabre and charming touches here and there, Dungeon Module G2 is sadly bereft of much material which provides characterization for the frost giants. The hill giants, for example, were filthy, drunken brutes with a certain vulgar charm, but the frost giants are a bit lacking in the directly described lore. Gary is depending on us to know our Norse mythology already, which is why I am talking about the frost giants here and now. The one hint we get about the nature of the frost giants is in an area called the Caverns of the Carls on Dungeon Level 2, which is a reference to Nordic house carls, or the Huskarlar. The word Karl just means man, but housemen means that these chosen giants would be the preferred warrior bodyguards of the Frost Giant Jarl himself, the mighty and fearsome Grugnur. These are called the Frost Giant Gentry by Gary, indicating that they are high-born giants of a more noble bloodline and higher social order. The lesser Frost Giant minions are then likely the Herd, or Hearth, a retinue of armed warriors serving the Jarl. If we make a distinction between the Housecarls and the other Frost Giant warriors, as Gary seems to do, then the Herd Giants are probably worthy warriors of a slightly lower station, serving as raiders instead of the esteemed guardians of the Jarl's noble glacial house. The best-known fantasy tale concerning frost giants is The Frost Giant's Daughter, which is a Conan story by Robert E. Howard. It was also later retitled as The Gods of the North. It was published in Weird Tales in 1932, and then again made available via Gnome Press in The Coming of Conan in 1953. It becomes more accessible in 1969 in Conan of Samaria as issued by Lancer Books. Since then, it has become a classic. It therefore seems likely that Gary was familiar with the tale in the years before he wrote G2, or even before the creation of Dungeons & Dragons itself. Also of note, the tale was featured in the comic book Conan the Barbarian number 16 in 1972, as well as The Savage Sword of Conan number 1 in 1974. The unforgettable Frank Frazetta cover of the Lancer book, which was also later used to premiere the Dark House Conan Frazetta cover series, depicts a young Conan battling in the snow, drawing first blood as he defiantly battles two battle-axe-wielding monstrosities. This masterwork is sometimes known as the Snow Giants, and its signature at bottom left reveals that Frazetta painted it in 1967. It would also be featured on hard rock band Dust's album Hard Attack, released in 1972. Wherever you find it, this art is well loved, and was also recently sold to Kirk Hammett, lead guitarist of Metallica, for $1 million. In Robert E. Howard's story version entitled Gods of the North, the frost giant warriors who inspired Frazetta's art are depicted as follows. Yet he did not wonder at the necromantic strangeness of it all, not even when two gigantic figures rose up to bar his way. The scales of their mail were white with hoarfrost, their helmets and their axes were sheathed in ice. Snow sprinkled their locks. In their beards were spikes of icicles. Their eyes were cold as the aurora lights that streamed above them. The giants answered with roars like the grinding of icebergs on a frozen shore, and heaved up their shining axes as the maddened Akabitanian hurled himself upon them. A frosty blade flashed before his eyes, blinding him with its brightness, and he gave back a terrible stroke that sheared through his foe's thigh. With a groan, the victim fell, and at that instant Amra was dashed into the snow, his left shoulder numb from the blow of the survivor, from which the warrior's mail had barely saved his life. Amra saw the remaining giant looming above him like a colossus carved of ice, etched against the glowing sky. The axe fell, to sink through the snow and deep into the frozen earth as Amra hurled himself aside and leaped to his feet. The giant roared and wrenched the axe head free, but even as he did so, Amra's sword sang down. The giant's knees bent, and he sank slowly into the snow, which turned crimson with the blood that gushed from his half-severed neck. In the Tales of Harold Shea, a frost giant is also succinctly, and much less vividly, described as a white-skinned, slender albino with blonde hair, pink eyes, and a nose reddened by ulcers. Gary Gygax's own description in the 1977 Monster Manual is dead white or ivory skin color, blue-white or yellow hair, and pale blue or yellow eyes. Most fearsome of all these evil giants stands the imperious Jarl Grugnur himself, impaler of foolish foes. As many know, a Jarl, sometimes called a Jarl, is a Scandinavian earl, a minor noble, prince, or chieftain who rules a territory in the name of a king. Grugnur was probably inspired by the Old Norse tale of Ymir, or Orgelmir, and is surely one of his distant yet ever fierce descendants. Savvy readers of Gygax will note that Grugnur is very near to the name Gungnir the Swain, which is Odin's rune spear that was cut from the wood of the world tree Yggdrasil itself. I also note that Gungnir the spear was mentioned by name in the Tales of Harold Shea, and that might indeed have been Gary's inspiration for the Jarl's name. Grugnur is a powerful warrior, a womanizer. Consider, for example, the storm giantess that he has held in durance vile, and he seems to be far more concerned with security than are either Chieftain Nosnra or King Snur of the fire giants. As an example, when hill giant chief Nosnra revels in a grand hall that has many of its approaches unguarded, and where King Snur defiantly sits on his throne at the very forefront of his stronghold, as if beckoning challengers into his arena of death, Jarl Grugnur instead is hidden away in the very last approachable place underground, beneath the Glacial Rift. He seems to have been born to power by way of noble blood, but perhaps his and bloodline's longevity is a result only of his ever-vigilant caution. And that is what most of what we know about the frost giants and their Jarl. There's really not much else to go on in G2's pages, but what can we find out about their lair and all of those creatures who dwell there? Those are matters that we will explore later on in this discussion. And now, consider this passage from The Age of Fable by Bulfinch, 1855. The mighty ash tree Yggdrasil was supposed to support the whole universe. It sprang from the body of the frost giant Ymir, and had 3 immense roots, extending one into Asgard, the dwelling of the gods, the other into Jotunheim, the abode of the giants, and the third root to Niflheim, the regions of darkness and cold. By the side of each of these roots is a spring, from which the root is watered. The root that extends into Asgard is carefully tended by the 3 Norns, fate goddesses, who are regarded as the dispensers of the fates. They are Urdur, the past, Verdandi, the present, and Skuld, the future. The spring at the Jotunheim side is Ymir's well, in which wisdom and wit lie hidden, but that of Niflheim feeds the dragon Nidhogger, darkness, which perpetually gnaws at the root. In our earlier exploration, we considered the lore of the frost giants and Gygax's Conan or Amra and Shea-themed inspirations, which lead to the writing of TSR Dungeon Module G2. Now, we are going to consider the Glacial Rift proper, where they lair, the lair not only of the Hrimthursar frost giants of Grugnur, but also many other fell beasts of the frozen wastes. The Glacial Rift itself is inspired in part by Ginnungagap, the frozen abyss of Old Norse mythology, which is mentioned in the Giflaginning section of the 12th century prose Edda. A rough translation of the relevant passage would read as follows in English. Gangleri asked, How were all things wrought, ere all the races were, and the tribes of men increased? Then said Har, as in reply, the streams are called ice waves, those which were so long ago come from the fountain heads that the yeasty venom upon them had hardened like the slag that runs out of the molten fire. These streams then became ice, and when the ice halted and ceased to run, then it froze over from above. But the drizzling of the rain that rose from the venom congealed into rime, and the rime increased, frost over frost, each over the other, even into Ginnungagap, which we know as the yawning void. Then spoke Jafnhar, echoing lore further, Ginnungagap, which faced toward the northern quarter of the world, became filled with heaviness and masses of ice and rime, and from within drizzling rain and gusts. But the southern part of the yawning void was lighted by those sparks and glowing masses which flew out of Muspelheim. And Theridae spoke of ice and fire. Just as cold arose out of Niflheim, and all terrible things arose so forth, so too did all that looked toward Muspelheim become hot and glowing. But the frigid Ginnungagap was as mild as windless air, and when the breath of heat met the rime so that it melted and dripped, life was quickened from the yeast drops by the power of that which sent the heat. And this, the heated essence, became a great man's form. And that man is named Ymir, but the rime giants call him Orgelmir. And from thence are come the races of the rime giants, as it says in Voluspa the Lesser, all the witches spring from Witolf, all the warlocks are of Wilharm, and the spell singers spring from Svarthead, all the ogres of Ymir come. But concerning this, so says Vafthrudnir the giant, out of the ice waves issued venom drops, waxing until a giant was. Thence are our kindred come all together, so it is they are savage forever. The venom-born frost giants, then, can lay claim to the origins of the Nordic world, which they defend against the incursions of greedy and impious mortal kind. In addition to the lore of Ginnungagap, the Glacial Rift is probably inspired by the realm of Niflheim itself, the home of the mists. The Prose Edda tells us that cold arose out of Niflheim and all terrible things. The domain featured in Module G2 is a lesser and upper remnant of this ancient time and place. When Gary Gygax refers to a glacial rift, he is almost certainly referring to what geologists now term a U-shaped valley, which is caused by glaciation. Classic examples include Yosemite Valley, the St. Mary River Valley in Glacial National Park, and various unnamed valleys in the Sierra Nevada wilderness. The blockage of boulders and frozen rubble at the south end of the Jarl's Rift, by the way, is called a moraine. The best examples I know of in my own visual experience are found in Rocky Mountain National Park here in Colorado, not too far from my home. On the G2 maps, a studious dungeon master will note that the valley opens to the north and descends to the south, with caverns lying below the far southern edge. Level 1 of this dungeon is a descending map, while Level 2 features the Frost Giant's nether domain. The rift rims some 300 feet from top to bottom, and you can see Gygax's elevation markers displayed upon the Dungeon Level 1 map, part of which is on the surface. The glacier, as noted in the description of area number 21A, extends about a mile down to the south and east in the realms of Greyhawk. This dungeon module is filled with brief inferences that, arguably, infer Gygax's familiarity with Bullfinch's mythology in general, as well as the Norse mythos in particular. As one other example of interesting detail, consider that Jarl's mighty lady wife, if we make logical inferences about her bloodline, just as we can the Jarl himself, could indeed well descend from the bloodlines of both the Frost Giants and also of the goddess HEL, or Helya. Consider from the Prose Edda. Hel he cast into Niflheim, and gave to her power over 9 worlds, to apportion all abodes among those that were sent to her, that is, men dead of sickness or of old age. She has great possessions there. Her walls are exceeding high, and her gates are great. Her hall is called Sleet Cold, her dish is hunger. Famine is her knife, idler her thrall, sloven her maidservant. Pit of stumbling is the name of her threshold by which one enters. Disease is her bed, gleaming bale her bed hangings. She is half blue-black and half flesh color, by which she is easily recognized, and very lowering and fierce. Another setting that probably inspired Gary in the design of G2 Level 1, especially when we consider the encounter with the Remoraz, would be Snow Devil Glacier. This is the setting for the Conan tale, The Lair of the Ice Worm, written well after Robert E. Howard's passing by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. Of course, all of these writers are well featured in Gygax's Appendix N as well. For those who are not yet familiar with Lynn Carter's considerable influence over early Dungeons & Dragons and imaginary worlds, I will discuss that on Hawk Moor at another time. But in this tale, The Lair of the Ice Worm, which follows after Conan's adventure in The Frost Giant's Daughter, Conan dares a mountain crossing from the Iglothian Mountains into the Border Kingdoms, which necessitates a trek across the wild Snow Devil Glacier that lies in the waste between. And if you need a campaign name for the glacier, which the Glacial Rift lies adjacent to, there you are. Conan saves a young Hyperborean maiden named Ilga from the Snow Devils, which are basically the inspiration for the Yeti Scouts that are found in Gygax's dungeon module. You might have noted that the Yetis are a bit more civilized than you might otherwise expect, and their chieftain, for example, wields a powerful magic sword. That is because they are inspired, most likely, by this tale. Conan in the story slays many snow devils, but his horse is killed as well. Conan takes Ilga to the safety of an ice cave, but that night Ilga is awakened by haunting green eyes and alluring song-like trillings in the icy air. Beguiled, she walks out into the cold. Conan is then awakened by her absence. He follows her tracks and finds the marks left by some kind of slithering giant serpent. He finds the skeleton of his horse, stripped of all flesh by the mysterious predator. He then finds the grisly half-remains of Ilga herself as the serpent's second feast of the night. Conan then remembers the legends of the Yakmar, the Remora, the ice lizard. He vows to hunt the beast to avenge Ilga, but a plan is required. So Conan later tracks the markings to the glacier itself and a great ice cave hollow which lies within. There, Conan beholds the Remora, and it attempts to beguile and consume him as well. But Conan has brought a helmet full of burning cinders from his fire, and he has heated his battle axe. He throws the fiery axe into the jaws of the Remora, and the coals in soon after. He escapes with his life as the entire ice cave collapses. And this scene, of course, is the secret origin of the Dungeons & Dragons Remoraz. You might recall that the Remoraz was originally created and drawn by artist Errol Otis, and then refined for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons publication by Gary in TSR. This appearance of the Remoraz in Dungeon Module G2 represents Gary's development of the creature's mythos. You might also be interested in an often forgotten footnote hidden away in the TSR Dungeon Master's Guide on page 183 in my edition, where we learned that giant white-furred constrictor snakes dwell in the D&D world's Arctic wilderness. This would be more fully noted later in the Deities and Demigods hardcover, where we learn that these monsters are inspired by the Newan lore of Fritz Lieber as well. Readers might also be interested to see the Marvel Comics version of the furred Iceworm and the Snowmen, which you can see and learn about over on one of the Marvel pages online. By curious coincidence, this tale would soon be featured again in The Savage Sword of Conan number 34, which dates to October 1978, just a few months after the writing of Dungeon Module G2 had been completed. And that, although there is much more to discuss about the Frost Giants and the Glacial Rift, is all that I have for now. Later on, we will end this Gygaxian Frost Giant lore delving deeper, and then perhaps turn our beholder's gaze to somewhat warmer or hotter climes in the giant realms. Thank you for listening to Hawk Moor. Stay tuned.